Thank you very much. Ms. Rabab Fatima, Under Secretary General and High Representative, United Nations Office of the High Representative for LDCs, LLDCs, and SEEDs. Her Excellency Ms. Kadra Hassan, Ambassador of Djibouti, LDCs Coordinator in the WTO, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates and officials, dear colleagues. Let me take this opportunity to warmly welcome you all, and especially those of you coming from abroad to our host country, Ethiopia, and to ECA. ECA is pleased to host the 5th regional consultation of the United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries, LDC 5, for African LDCs and Haiti. Special thanks to our partners for this event, the World Trade Organization, the Enhanced Integrated Framework, and of course, the United Nations Office of the High Representatives for LDCs, LLDCs, and SEEDs for taking the lead. I would like to start by saying that the Doha Program of Action for Least Developed Countries for the decade 2022-2031, adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations last April, is particularly timely for Africa. Indeed, it's no secret that Africa and its LDCs has been significantly impacted by global events, like the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine. It is part of our mission at the ECA to use the tools and human capital we have to help mitigate these impacts and build Africa into a 21st century economy. We are particularly proud to have contributed to the ongoing initiative to help Africa deepen its participation in the battery and electric vehicles value chain, particularly in DRC and Zambia. This initiative could enable the continent to tap into global value expected to reach $8.8 trillion in the next 3 years and $46 trillion by 2050. In addition, our work on the Transboundary Agro-Industry Park and Special Economic Zone involving Zimbabwe and Zambia is equally promising. This work could equip these two landlocked and least developed countries to claim the role of breadbaskets for Southern Africa and possibly Africa as a whole, tapping into Africa's food import market valued at about 90 billion naira per year. This is particularly important in view of the current crisis in the food sector in the context of the Ukraine crisis. The adverse impacts of the pandemic and the conflict in Europe have manifested themselves in Africa through their disruptive role in global supply chains, thereby exposing Africa's excessive dependence on imports for critical products. The pandemic showed how vulnerable Africa was to export restrictions in essential medical equipment and supplies, while the conflict in Ukraine laid bare Africa's dependence on Russia and Ukraine for staple foods. As such, the focus of the Doha Program of Action on increasing LDC's exports through, among others, accelerating digital transformation and building institutional capacities cannot be more timely. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa is home to 33 of the world's 46 LDCs, as the USG has just reminded us. Together, the 33 African LDCs account for nearly 53% of the continent's total population and approximately 60% of its total landmass. So it is important for the continent to focus on LDCs. It should also be emphasized that 13 of the 33 African LDCs are also classified as landlocked developing countries, LLDCs, with added pressure that not having direct access to sea and ports represents. While growth amongst LDCs has been largely positive in recent decades, the COVID-19 pandemic, combined with the Ukraine crisis, has slowed it down and reduced the fiscal space for many governments. Multiple obstacles clearly stand in the way of LDCs realizing their growth and development goals. Africa does have tools it can utilize to help overcome these constraints, starting with the implementation of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA. Historically, the trade of African LDCs is concentrated in the export of goods that feature low value along value chains, such as fuels and mineral ores. In addition, the trade of African LDCs is characterized by strong dependence on imports from third parties for critical manufactures, food, and processed energy products. This dependence exposes the LDCs to the vagaries of international markets, and more recently, disruptions to global supply chains. The CFTA holds great promise to help LDCs recover and accelerate growth. ECA's latest empirical assessment of this AFCFTA-led policy reforms reveals that successful implementation of the agreement is expected to positively impact Africa's GDP, trade, and welfare. It is worth noting that the benefits are forecast to be largely concentrated in intra-African trade. Indeed, with the CFTA agreement in place, intra-African trade could be around 34% higher in 2045 than what could be in absence of the CFTA in the same year. So the CFTA is important for Africa growth in intra-African trade. Intra-African trade in each of the major sectors of agri-food, industry, and services is expected to grow by approximately 49%, 36%, and 38% respectively. The energy and mining sectors, while still expected to grow, will grow by only around 19% over the same period. Importantly, the composition of intra-African trade is currently dominated by industry, which contrasts with Africa's trade with the rest of the world, as Africa mainly exports fuels and other primary commodities. So, the effective implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is projected to help Africa's industrialize and diversify away from energy and mining. This statement is in line with the outcomes of the recently held African Union Extraordinary Summit on Sustainable Industrialization and Economic Diversification, which was held in Niamey, Niger. In turn, successful implementation of the AFCFTA agreement is anticipated to help build Africa's resilience and potentially reduce its current trade dependence on external partners, which is critical in light of the vulnerabilities exposed by COVID-19 pandemic and the conflict in Ukraine, as we said earlier, and to mitigate the potential negative impacts of future external shocks. With a few exceptions, the overall trend towards more industrialized economic structures is confirmed at country level, as the bulk of the absolute gains in national exports, including from LDCs to the rest of Africa, following implementation of the CFTA agreement, come from the industrial sector. So industrialization is important, a message again that came very strongly from Niamey. While the AFCFTA promise is high, that promise can be only realized if the agreement is implemented efficiently. So your references about supporting trade and trade and transport facilitation, the implementation, the boosting into African trade is critical for us to realize the full potential of the CFTA. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I make no efforts to hide the fact that implementing the agreement and supporting African economies, and particularly LDCs, is no small task. But with the resolve we have seen through these troubling times, and the dedication I see as I look around today, I rest assured that Africa will overcome. I thank you for your kind attention. I wish all of us successful deliberation. Thank you.